We hope you enjoy today's story. We were eagerly awaiting the arrival of the passengers in the airport baggage claim area. My brother-in-law Lawbob was present with his two daughters, Danica, aged 9, and Louisa, aged 7. My companions were my son David, aged 12, and my daughter Sheila, aged 9. The children were holding up a large sign that read, "Welcome home, moms." 2 weeks ago, my wife Mandy and her sister Helen had gone on vacation to the beaches of Bice. It is an excellent method of escaping the cold winters of Minnesota, especially in January. At last, the passengers began to appear at the door. The children cheered loudly when they saw their mothers. Both women looked radiant with their tans and bright smiles. Mandy greeted her children and embraced them affectionately. She then turned to me and kissed me deeply, expressing her love and affection. I reciprocated the gesture with equal passion, holding her in a prolonged embrace. She whispered in my ear, "Wait until tonight, my love. I'll show you how much I've missed you." After 15 years of marriage, she demonstrated her intimate knowledge of me. One such aspect of my character is my keen interest in tan lines. Once the children had retired for the night, we proceeded directly to the bedroom. My partner, please assume a recumbent position in the bed and await my emergence from the bathroom. In the blink of an eye, I found myself in bed, awaiting Mandy's return. A few minutes later, Mandy emerged from the bathroom in a thong bikini. Mandy's most attractive feature has always been her very beautiful face. Her face was made for smiles, and wherever she went, she had the most beautiful face. However, she was also her own worst critic when it came to her body. She was her own worst critic when it came to her body. She felt she was too short, too skinny, not big enough in the chest, and too thick in the hips. A side effect of 2 pregnancies was that her breasts had become fuller and more voluptuous. The thong bikini certainly showcased her lovely curves, but the most impressive aspect of Mandy's appearance was yet to be revealed. She stood at the foot of the bed, displaying her radiant golden tan, acquired during her time at the beach. She proceeded to slowly pull down the thong, revealing a pristine white patch of skin at the front. There were faint tan lines where the thong straps had been, which collectively served to ignite a profound sense of arousal within me. She then proceeded to unfasten the bikini top, allowing the fabric to hang from her chest. Finally, the bikini fell to the floor, exposing her white breasts. I immediately moved to the foot of the bed, grasped her waist, and pulled her close, kissing her white breasts while my hands caressed her body. Kisses gently trailed down from her chest. We spent a considerable amount of time during the night rediscovering each other. A few days later, Mandy was cleaning the bathtub. I stood in the hallway, taking in the view of her moving buttocks. Mandy sensed my presence and glanced over her shoulder. "You are standing there, and I am looking at you and contemplating what I would do if you were not wearing pants and the children were already in bed." I replied honestly, "Pervert." She giggled. She stood up and walked over to me. She removed her plastic gloves and tossed them over her shoulder, right into the sink. She approached me with a teasing gait, swaying her hips and pressing her entire body against mine, her belly against my aroused body. This is how one can engage in teasing behavior. Normally, I would have pressed my hips to increase the contact, but I was unable to do so due to a sudden onset of fear. A sense of unease washed over me. I was unable to identify the source of this feeling, although I was conscious of a distinct lack of familiarity with the scene before me. Mandy, in response to my apparent lack of response to her teasing, resorted to further physical contact, thrusting her hips in a gesture that seemed to convey her frustration. I then turned and retrieved the gloves from the sink. I considered the possibility that I should complete the cleaning of the bathroom. At that moment, I became aware of a previously unnoticed detail. I turned pale and turned away from Mandy. I muttered, "I'm going to the garage," without caring whether or not Mandy heard me. I sat on the workbench, lost in my thoughts, and had a foreboding sense about what I had just discovered. I was certain that, if Mandy had been unfaithful to me while she was in B, she would have no difficulty in finding a man willing to engage in sexual intercourse with her. What I had observed made sense, only, if she had indeed engaged in such behavior during her vacation with her sister, what would be the appropriate course of action if I were to discover that she had been unfaithful? The answer was clear. I would terminate the relationship without hesitation. It would undoubtedly cause distress, and the fact that we had children together would only exacerbate the situation. Why had she done this to me and to us? These questions continued to occupy my mind throughout the evening. Despite my suspicions, I lacked concrete evidence to substantiate her infidelity. How could I ascertain the truth with certainty? From a distance of 000 m, I was unable to confront her directly, as she would undoubtedly deny the allegations. I considered approaching her sister, but given their long-standing relationship and similar personalities, I doubted she would provide any tangible evidence. I had observed that, if one sister engaged in unfaithfulness, the other would likely follow suit. I decided to discuss my concerns with Bob at a later point in time. I was suddenly called back to the garage by Mandy, who had been there for over 2 hours. I informed her that I was merely tidying up. At that moment I had a sudden insight. I had no desire to engage in sexual intercourse with her. In fact, I had already contracted a cold, which I had realized upon waking that morning. I decided that I would spend the next few days sleeping on the couch. Mandy seemed displeased with this decision. I acquiesced, however, and prepared her a cup of chamomile tea. Once Mandy had retired for the night, I was left to my thoughts. My mind raced from one idea to the next. I was consumed by a desire to understand why she had done it. I was also consumed by a desire to know whether Helen was involved. Should I speak with Bob to find out if Helen was involved? At some point, I became aware of a reliable method for determining whether Mandy had been unfaithful. She exhibited a strong tendency to maintain communication with her social network on various digital platforms. Mandy's address book contained at least 600 or 700 contacts, with potentially even more if she had connected with someone in BICE. It was likely that she had exchanged contact information with these individuals to facilitate ongoing communication. However, I was uncertain about the extent to which she would utilize her current email account, given our shared knowledge of passwords. The following day, I was fatigued and unable to concentrate at work. I scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer for the subsequent day, Friday. I then contacted Bob and requested a lunch meeting. He was initially incredulous but agreed to meet. I informed him of my discovery and, initially, he reacted with skepticism. However, I was eventually able to persuade him of the gravity of the situation. I requested his assistance in determining whether Helen had been unfaithful, citing a severe case of the flu. I left the office at an early hour and returned home at 3 p.m. I promptly installed a keylogging program on our home computer. It took approximately 1 week for me to ascertain the truth. Mandy had accessed a different email account. The password for this account consisted of the names and ages of our children. Just a few days after returning from BICE, she was communicating on a daily basis with Brad. The emails were explicit from both Mandy and Helen. Helen had also engaged in sexual intercourse with a man named Steve. I forwarded all emails sent and received by Mandy to myself. I then deleted all traces of my monitoring from my email account. I sent several of these emails to Bob. I discovered that they had been engaging in sexual intercourse almost from the beginning. During the same day, they even engaged in sexual intercourse with different partners on multiple occasions. They had already begun discussing the possibility of meeting again next month in Chicago. The girls would feign going shopping while the two men, who were longtime friends, would pretend to watch the Chicago Blackhawks. A cursory examination of Mandy's and Helen's social media pages revealed 2 recent acquaintances, Brad Simmons and Steve Reiner, both hailing from Illinois, were revealed to be married. This information presented a significant challenge to my investigation. Bob denied the possibility of Helen and Mandy engaging in extramarital relations. He chose to keep my suspicions a secret but never fully accepted the possibility of his wife's infidelity. I empathized with his perspective. Given Mandy's behavior with me and the children, it was difficult to believe that she was planning to end our marriage. She appeared to be loving and caring, and at times, I even doubted my suspicions. This was helpful as I had to resume regular sexual intercourse with her. I called Bob at work and said, "Hey Bob, it's Jack." I asked him to access the account. "I accessed your personal email account from work. You had indeed sent me something. I read all the emails and called you back. I waited for approximately half an hour before you called back. In a fit of rage, you informed me that you were going to throw her out on the street. You then proceeded to express your love for her and your willingness to do anything for her. Please, Bob, calm down. I have a plan and I need your help. We cannot let them know that we know. I cannot. I need to hurt her badly. I will, Bob. I promise you that. But for now, pull yourself together. Call home and leave a message that you are working late tonight. We will meet at the Old Town Pub. I will inform you of my plans at a later time." Bob and I had our inaugural strategy meeting. Bob, could you elucidate which actions might inflict genuine harm upon our wives, aside from physical violence? I posed this question to Bob, who did not respond. It is regrettable that I am unable to shame them in the presence of their loved ones. You are aware of the dynamics within our family, particularly with regard to our father. It is widely known that Tom adores his two daughters. I inquired of Bob whether he concurred with this assessment. He did, but also noted that Tom's greatest source of frustration was being cheated on by his wives. This information was met with a discernible change in Bob's demeanor. Mandy, Helen's mother, had been unfaithful to him throughout their marriage. Following the dissolution of their union, she was awarded custody of the two girls, the house, generous alimony and child support, and a significant portion of his company. He was forced to borrow considerable sums of money to purchase her share of the business, a process that took several years. His company has been restored to a stable financial position. He has sold the business and is currently enjoying a comfortable lifestyle. However, he frequently visits his daughters and grandchildren. I outlined my plan, which involved acting as loving husbands for 2 additional weeks. I suggested that they follow my example and engage in certain behaviors, such as catching colds and working late frequently. This would result in their becoming too sick to continue, or, alternatively, to the point of exhaustion, such that sexual intercourse with her is only possible once a week, and only for the sake of appearances. In due course, we will be free of them. That evening, I returned very late. Mandy was already in bed, and I feigned a severe headache. I considered the revenge plan, but soon fell asleep. I was already aware of it. I was already aware of the forthcoming shopping trip when Mandy announced that she and Helen had planned a shopping trip to Chicago. I informed her that it was a commendable idea. I planned to demonstrate my affection and support by staying at a downtown hotel. I even reserved the room myself using our joint credit card. The room was reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Johnston. Given that the room was to be occupied by 2 people, Helen and Mandy were delighted. Bob also offered to pay for a room. This room was reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Dorer, who were to occupy it as a couple. Bob and I made arrangements so that each of them would believe that they were occupying a room by themselves. We had reserved only 1 room, though we were aware that the girls would not be sharing. We were unaware that their partners would be accompanying them. The girls planned to take Friday off, fly to Chicago in the morning, and return on a late flight from Chicago on Sunday. The following week, I spoke with Tom Raines, Mandy's father. I informed him of my intention to surprise the girls by bringing the children and him to Chicago for a family gathering, given that the trip was scheduled just 2 weeks after our 15th wedding anniversary. Tom expressed his approval of the plan. I then requested that he reserve 3 rooms. He believed this would be a welcome surprise. Bob and I were displeased by our wives on the morning of their departure. The girls behaved in a manner reminiscent of 2 schoolgirls on their inaugural date. They laughed at everything and nothing, displaying a palpable nervous energy at the security gates. Despite our attempts to express our affection, they seemed unaware of our actions. Bob drove us to the airport. Upon returning to the city, I contacted the private detective I had hired, Mr. Alan White, via telephone. I inquired about the imminent arrival of the subjects in Chicago. Mr. White confirmed that they would be lodging in rooms 2011 and 2003, and that the necessary audio and video equipment had been set up. He assured me that everything was in place. Tom switched seats with my son David and sat next to me. He informed me that he had overheard my conversation with Bob and that he believed I was attempting to deceive him. He advised me that I and Bob appeared to be heading to a funeral and that we were up to something. What is the issue? I am sorry for not informing you, Tom. I am aware that you hold your daughters in high regard. However, I have some unfortunate news to share. It appears that they have been unfaithful to you. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Over the course of 2 weeks, I retained the services of a private detective to gather evidence for the impending divorce. Once the evidence is sufficient, we will file the necessary documentation. Tom, in a paternal gesture, placed his hand on my shoulder. I am sorry for your pain, son. I had hoped that the few years they spent with me would have a positive influence on their lives. I had hoped that having me as a father would have a positive influence on them, but I'm afraid that being raised by their mother for most of their teenage years had a constant negative influence on them. Tom cried. I was unprepared for the depth of his suffering. He stood up and returned to his seat. Alan White met us. At Chicago Airport, he approached me with 2 envelopes, one addressed to Bob and the other to me. They contained a set of compromising photographs and a DVD recording of events that had transpired the previous night. He informed us that the processing server would contact us shortly and that his operative was monitoring 2 bedrooms. His assistant would inform us. The most compromising and awkward moment occurred when Simmons and Rayner's wives received similar packages by midday. Bob and I requested that Alan and Tom watch the children for a brief period. We needed to ascertain the extent of the situation. I was disconcerted to observe Mandy in a multitude of sexual poses. The photograph in question depicted 2 individuals engaged in sexual intercourse. It was assumed that they had engaged in unprotected sexual intercourse. It was subsequently determined that both Bob and I would require testing for venereal diseases in Minneapolis. At that juncture, Alan White contacted his assistant to ascertain the status of the route to the hotel. The individuals in question had departed for lunch, and thus the situation appeared to be under control. Tom had reserved 3 rooms. We requested an additional keycard for rooms 2011 and 203, which were registered under our names. The clerk issued both keycards after verifying our identities. We informed the porter that our children had planned a surprise, requesting that he not alert our wives. We proceeded to the 3rd floor, where our rooms were located. After an hour of waiting, Alan White called to inform us that they had returned from lunch and were in their rooms. He also informed us that there had been a change in partners. Mandy was now with Rayner, and Helen was with Simmons. He stated that he was in the lobby and that the processing server had just arrived. He then informed me that he would send the server to our room. I turned off my phone and got out of bed. It was time to go, children. Sheila and David were instructed to remember what had been said. Grandpa and I would enter the room first. When I gave the signal, they were to shout, "Surprise, Mom!" There would be no exceptions. We proceeded up the stairs and stopped at the door. I inserted the key into the lock and opened the door quietly. Tom and I entered the room with the 2 children following us. However, they did not wait for us to close the door behind us. As soon as the door opened, they shouted, "Surprise, Mom! We're here!" Mandy was lying on the bed on all 4s, with Rayner behind her. Our appearance was indeed a surprise. Rayner promptly retrieved the trousers from the floor, donned them, and hastily gathered the remainder of his attire before exiting the room. At least he reacted expeditiously. Mandy swiftly dismounted the bed and began to collect her belongings. "No, no, no. This is not possible. What is happening here?" she cried. "Mommy's naked." Sheila emitted a high-pitched squeak, attempting to maneuver her body between Tom and me. I made a snapping motion with my fingers, indicating that the process server had entered the room. Mandy Johnston was the name on the envelope, which the server handed to Sheila. The document stated that she had been served, and the server took a photograph of Mandy holding the envelope. He attempted to conceal her chest, and subsequently departed. The children then proceeded to exit the room, leaving their mother to retrieve her clothing. Mandy was observed to be in a state of distress on the floor. She was aware of the contents of the envelope. Bob and his offspring were situated in the hallway. I then informed him that it was his turn to act. The situation with Helen Simmons had not proceeded as smoothly as anticipated. His aggressive behavior was provoked when he was pulled away from having sex with Helen from behind. He became enraged at the uninvited guests and punched Tom in the face. Bob did not require any further incentive to express his disappointment. The first thing Simmons felt was Bob punching him. Helen scratched his face in an act of self-defense, defending her father. It was an admirable act on her part to shield her father from harm. I proceeded to enter the room, apprehend Simmons, and forcibly remove him from the premises, ensuring he was not within the vicinity of the children. I then discarded his belongings in the bathroom. "Get dressed and leave promptly," I instructed. "You are no longer welcome here." Tom, Bob, and the children subsequently vacated the room, exhibiting no signs of embarrassment. Helen, however, lingered behind, clad only in her nightwear. A blanket. Her father turned to her with a stern expression, instructing her to return to the room and dress herself. She did so, returning to the bedroom. The process server had disappeared during the argument but now stood in the doorway. "Ellen D. Rowe." He handed her an envelope, informing her that she had been served. We proceeded to return upstairs, where our initial intention had been to spend the night and engage in one final discussion with our wives. However, I was not inclined to remain in the same room with Mandy. I collected our belongings and informed the children that we were departing. Tom indicated that he wished to remain, stating that he had a number of things to communicate to his daughters. Bob and his children also expressed a desire to stay. Despite Mandy's numerous pleas for forgiveness, the judge reviewed our case and granted an uncontested divorce 4 months later. It required significant effort on Tom's part to persuade Mandy to sign the divorce papers. The house was legally mine since I had inherited Ed from my parents before I met Mandy. Additionally, I was granted primary custody of the children. However, I did not request financial compensation from Mandy. Tom ensured their well-being. Our other assets were divided equitably, and I received a substantial gift from Tom the following Christmas to facilitate my financial recovery. He informed me that the gift was from Mandy's inheritance. The future inheritance was also a factor. Bob's divorce proceeded in a similar manner, except that their house was jointly owned. However, shortly after the divorce, Bob and Helen began dating again. It is highly probable that they will eventually reconcile. In contrast, there is no possibility that I will ever resume my relationship with Mandy. I was somewhat persuaded by her assertion that she deeply regretted her actions. I also believe that she still harbors feelings for me. My difficulty lies in the fact that her infidelity has irreparably damaged my capacity to love her. I am now unable to love her for the sake of our children. We maintain a polite and respectful relationship. We interacted with one another, but that was the extent of my involvement. One day, while she was occupied with preparing the children for their excursion, she inquired, "Jack, I am curious. How did you even learn about the regrettable action you discovered me to have taken in B? It was my infatuation with tan lines that led you to discover my indiscretion." "I am at a loss to comprehend," I replied. "I was fully clothed the entire time. We never visited a nude beach or any other location where such attire would be appropriate. Think about it, Mandy. What did you do each time you cleaned the bathroom with the necessary supplies? Chemicals. I gathered everything I needed, donned plastic gloves, and rolled up my sleeves." She stated, "You forgot one thing. You always did that first." I replied, "You removed your rings, your engagement ring and your wedding band. You did not have a tan line on your finger. Thank you for listening until the end. If you found this interesting, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment.